My name is Emma Harper, and I'm 29 years old. 3 weeks from now, I will stand in a courtroom and watch my father's face drain of color. I will watch my mother scream. I will watch two bailiffs tackle a man who once controlled an empire, pressing his designer suit into courthouse carpet while he shouts about knowing important people. But right now, in this moment I'm about to describe, I know none of that. Right now, I'm about to open an envelope that will change everything. The bailiff will read the list. Item 1, Item 2. Routine numbers that make my parents' lawyer smile with satisfaction. Then, Item 3. The judge will lean forward. Her eyes will narrow. "Stop," she'll say, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "Get security in here. Now!" My father will bolt from his chair. My mother will clutch her pearls and wail. And I will stand perfectly still, hands folded, heart calm, because I've been waiting 4 years for this moment. They thought they could silence me. They thought wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. 3 weeks earlier. The coffee was brewing when the doorbell rang. I remember that detail because I was standing at my kitchen counter watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I had time to review case files before my 9 o'clock meeting. My apartment in Northeast Portland caught the morning light beautifully at that hour. I'd chosen it for that reason, among others, the way the sun came through the windows and made the plants on the sill glow green, the way the space felt like mine, every corner earned, every piece of furniture chosen with intention. I'd built this life with my own hands. No trust fund, no family connections, just 4 years of working harder than anyone expected and saving every dollar I could spare. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the door. Some instinct was already whispering that this wasn't a delivery, wasn't a neighbor, wasn't anything routine. The man on the other side wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He held a manila envelope like it contained something contagious. His eyes met mine, then slid away, settling somewhere around my collarbone. That's when I knew. He asked me to confirm my name, verify my address, sign on the line. His pen was heavy and expensive. The envelope passed from his hands to mine, and he turned and walked away without another word, like he wanted distance between himself and whatever I was about to read. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him disappear down the stairs. Then I closed the door, walked to my kitchen table, and opened the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. The header stopped my breath. In the matter of the conservatorship of Emma Catherine Harper, petitioners Richard Harper and Patricia Harper, my parents, my own parents were petitioning the court to declare me incompetent. I read the words 3 times before they assembled into meaning. Pattern of emotional instability, financial immaturity, and reckless decision-making, unable to manage personal affairs without risk of significant harm. They wanted control of everything: my bank accounts, my apartment, my car, my decisions. They wanted to put their 29-year-old daughter, a senior forensic accountant who specialized in catching fraud, under their legal guardianship like a child who couldn't be trusted with her own lunch money. I kept reading, each line worse than the last. My career choice described as evidence of poor judgment. My estrangement from family framed as isolation requiring intervention. My financial independence twisted into proof that I was wasting resources without proper guidance. And then, near the bottom of the petition, a phrase that made my blood run cold. Respondent may possess materials that could endanger herself and others. They weren't just trying to control me. They were trying to find something specific. I set the papers down and looked around my apartment. At the bookshelf I'd assembled myself, filled with novels and professional journals. At the peace lily on the windowsill that I'd nursed from a struggling seedling into something thriving. At the framed photo of myself at my master's graduation, alone, smiling, free. This was my life. Every inch of it earned. And they thought they could take it because they had money and lawyers and a lifetime of practice making their cruelty look like concern. 4 years ago, I walked away from the Harper family. I was 25, fresh out of graduate school, interning at my father's company because he insisted it would teach me the real world. It taught me something all right. It taught me that the man I called father would look me in the eye and tell me that some questions weren't meant to be asked, that some doors were meant to stay closed. I'd found discrepancies in the accounting records, payments that didn't match invoices, material orders that didn't align with what arrived on job sites. The Riverside Bridge renovation project kept appearing in the irregularities. I cross-referenced material orders with delivery receipts. The gaps were staggering. Grade 60 rebar ordered, the high-strength steel required for bridge load-bearing structures, but internal memos referenced grade 40 being delivered. Cheaper, weaker, never intended for the stresses a bridge would face. Premium concrete specified in contracts. Standard mix noted in site reports. Someone was substituting cheaper materials and pocketing the difference. I brought my concerns to him privately, professionally, thinking he'd want to know. His face went still when I showed him the documents. His eyes, always cold, turned to ice. "You're seeing problems that don't exist," he said. "Some doors are meant to stay closed, Emma. Close this one." That wasn't advice. That was a command. I remember sitting in his office, all dark wood and leather and the smell of expensive cigars, and feeling something crack inside me. The realization that my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and checked under my bed for monsters, was telling me to ignore evidence of fraud on a public infrastructure project. "But Dad," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, "if the bridge materials are substandard—" "Your internship is over." His voice was flat, final. "Effective immediately. Clean out your desk." The next morning, my office computer had been upgraded without my knowledge. All the files I'd been reviewing were gone. My access to the financial archives was revoked. HR called to inform me that my position was being eliminated due to restructuring. That night, I stayed late, used credentials that hadn't been deactivated yet, copied everything I could find onto an external hard drive. I didn't know exactly what I was taking. I just knew that whatever my father was hiding, I needed a record of it. I drove away the next morning with a single suitcase, that hard drive, and a desperate hope that I could build something on my own. I didn't look back. 6 months later, a headline appeared in the Portland Tribune. "Riverside Bridge Collapse. 3 construction workers dead." I remember reading it in my studio apartment, coffee going cold in my hands. The official investigation concluded it was unforeseen material fatigue. Harper Construction was cleared of any negligence. Settlements were paid quietly, quickly, sealed. My father gave a statement expressing deep sympathy for the families. And I sat alone, knowing in my gut that those 3 men had died because of the discrepancies I'd found, the questions I'd asked, the door my father had slammed in my face. Their names were listed in the article. James Peterson, 42, structural welder, survived by wife Linda and 2 children. Robert Miller, 38, safety inspector, military veteran. Daniel Brooks, 28, junior engineer, engaged to be married. I never opened that hard drive, not then. I was too scared, too uncertain, too focused on surviving my new life to confront the weight of what I might have carried with me. But 4 years later, 6 months before that petition arrived at my door, I finally found the courage. What I saw confirmed everything I'd feared. Financial records showing systematic fraud, material substitutions across multiple projects, emails between my father and his CFO discussing how to keep the paper clean, and a direct connection to the Riverside Bridge, to the substandard materials, to the 3 men who fell to their deaths because someone decided their lives were worth less than profit margins. I closed the files and sat in silence for a long time. Now, holding this conservatorship petition, I understood. This was never about protecting me. This was about silencing me. They knew I had the evidence. They knew I could destroy everything my father had built, and they were trying to take control of my life before I could use it. I walked to my bedroom closet, knelt before the small safe hidden behind a false panel, and entered the combination. The door swung open with a soft click. The hard drive sat there, black and ordinary, containing everything. Tonight, I would read through every file again. Tomorrow, I would find a lawyer. And whatever came after, I would face it standing up. They'd had 4 years to find me, to silence me, to make this go away. They'd waited too long. Now it was my turn. I found Diane Foster's name in article after article. The conservatorship killer, one legal blog called her. The woman who dismantled power grabs for a living. I picked up my phone and dialed her number before I could second-guess myself. The line rang twice before someone answered. Diane Foster speaking. The voice was calm, measured, professional. I explained my situation in 3 sentences, trying to keep my voice steady. Conservatorship petition filed by my parents. I'm financially stable, professionally successful, mentally sound, and there's more to this story than they want anyone to know. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Diane spoke again. I've handled cases like this before. The wealthy don't file conservatorships out of love, Ms. Harper. They file them for control. She scheduled me for an in-person consultation the following morning. Bring everything, she said. Bank statements, tax returns, employment records, anything that proves your competence. Her voice dropped slightly. And Emma? Bring whatever it is they're really after. I froze. How did she know there was something else? In my experience, she continued, these petitions always have a hidden target. See you tomorrow at 9. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should, and allowed myself one moment of pure hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this fight after all. Diane's office was downtown, 10th floor of a modern building with glass walls and a view of the Willamette River. Everything about it was different from the wood-paneled, cigar-scented law firms my father frequented. Clean lines, efficient design, no pretense. Diane Foster rose to greet me when I entered. She was in her early 50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her handshake was firm, her expression neutral. She wore a simple black blazer, no jewelry except a practical watch. I liked her immediately. We sat at her conference table and I presented everything I'd brought. Bank statements showing consistent savings and responsible spending, credit reports with a score of 782 and 0 delinquencies, tax returns filed on time for 4 consecutive years, employment records documenting promotions, raises, and glowing performance reviews from Jennifer Ryan, my boss at Morrison and Associates. She reviewed each document carefully, nodding at the obvious evidence of my competence. On paper, their case is absurd, she said finally. You're clearly capable of managing your own affairs. She looked at me directly. Which means this isn't about capability. What are they really after? I hesitated for only a moment. Then I placed the hard drive on her desk. I told her everything. The internship, the discrepancies, my father's warning, my departure, the files I'd copied, the collapse, the cover-up. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she picked up the hard drive and turned it over in her hands, as if weighing its contents. This isn't just a conservatorship defense anymore, she said quietly. This is evidence of criminal fraud and negligent homicide. If this goes public, your father faces prison. I know, I said. They know you have it. That's why they filed. She set the drive down and met my eyes. You need to understand what you're holding, Emma. This makes you dangerous to very powerful people. They won't just fight you in court. They'll fight dirty, surveillance, intimidation, maybe worse. She paused. Are you prepared for that? I thought of James Peterson, Robert Miller, Daniel Brooks. I thought of their families, silenced with $50,000 and a piece of paper. I thought of my father writing, "Keep the paper clean," while men walked onto a bridge that wasn't safe. I didn't survive 4 years of silence to stay quiet now, I said. We go to war. Diane nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in her eyes. Then we need more than files. We need witnesses. She leaned forward. 20 years ago, my father tried to do the same thing to me, filed for conservatorship to control my inheritance after my mother died. I fought him and won. Her voice was steady, but I heard the old wound beneath it. That's why I do this. Because I know what it's like when the people who are supposed to protect you become the people you need protection from. For the first time since opening that envelope, I felt something other than fear or anger. I felt understood. "We have 3 weeks until the hearing," Diane said, pulling out a legal pad. "We need to build a case so airtight they can't spin their way out, and we need to find the people your father thought he'd buried." The black sedan appeared the next morning. I noticed it as I left my apartment building, walking toward the parking garage across the street. It sat at the corner, engine running, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I'd never seen it parked there before. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, someone waiting to pick up a friend. But something in my gut disagreed, and 4 years of living on guard had taught me to trust that instinct. I kept walking, kept my pace steady, didn't look back. The parking garage was dim and cool, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls. I reached my Honda on level 2 and was unlocking the door when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow near the stairwell. There and then gone. I turned quickly, keys clutched in my fist, heart hammering. Nothing. Just empty parking spaces and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But the feeling remained, pressing against my skin like humidity before a storm. Someone was watching me. I drove to work with my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as much as the road ahead. The black sedan pulled out of its spot when I did, settling 3 cars behind me. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I took an unexpected turn onto a side street. The sedan continued straight, disappearing around the corner. Coincidence? My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and Diane's warning echoed in my mind. Surveillance, intimidation, maybe worse. They knew I was preparing something. They were letting me know they were watching. The message was clear. Back off or face consequences. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept driving. I'd come too far to be frightened into silence now. At work, I struggled to focus. Cases blurred together on my screen, numbers refusing to resolve into meaning. My thoughts kept returning to Diane's words. "We need witnesses." During my lunch break, I stepped outside and opened my laptop, started searching. Linda Peterson, Portland, Oregon. The results populated slowly. A Facebook profile, privacy settings high, a mention in a 2020 obituary for James Peterson, an address in Southeast Portland. I stared at the screen for a long moment. This was the widow of a man my father's fraud had killed. A woman who'd been paid $50,000 to stay silent. A woman who had every reason to hate the Harper name. And I was about to ask her to trust me. My phone buzzed. Email notification. The sender was an encrypted address I didn't recognize, just a string of random characters. The subject line made my heart stop. "You're not the only one who knows." I opened the message with trembling fingers. "I know what you have. I know what Harper Construction did to Riverside Bridge. They buried the truth. They buried the people who asked questions. I was one of those people. I survived. Barely. If you're planning to fight, you'll need more than files. Meet me if you want the full picture. Public place. Your choice." A former believer. I stared at the screen for a long time. Someone else knew. Someone who'd been inside the company. Someone who'd asked questions. Someone who'd survived. The phrase, "buried the people who asked questions," echoed in my mind. How many others had tried to expose this? How many had been silenced? I didn't reply. Not yet. First, I needed to talk to Diane. But hope was starting to kindle in my chest, small and fierce. I wasn't alone. I returned to my apartment that evening just as the sun was setting, painting the Portland sky in shades of orange and purple. My mind was still racing with plans. Diane's strategy, the mysterious email, the widow I needed to find. I climbed the stairs to my floor, rounded the corner to my door, and stopped. The door was ajar. Not by much. 2 inches, maybe less. But I always locked it. Always. I never forgot. I stood frozen, staring at the thin strip of darkness visible through the gap. Scratch marks surrounded the keyhole, fresh gouges in the metal plate. Someone had been inside. My first instinct was to run. My second was to call 911. My third, the one I followed, was to push the door open slowly, using my elbow to avoid smudging any fingerprints. The living room revealed itself in stages. Drawers pulled open, contents scattered across the floor, couch cushions displaced, thrown aside like afterthoughts. Papers from my home office spread across every surface, some crumpled, some torn. The violation hit me like a physical blow. This was my sanctuary, the space I'd built piece by piece over 4 years. Now it looked like a crime scene, which, I supposed, it was. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, heart pounding, listening for any sound that might indicate the intruders were still inside. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic outside. They were gone. But they'd left their message, written in chaos across everything I owned. I moved through the apartment carefully, cataloging the damage. Kitchen cabinets hung open. Bathroom medicine cabinet searched, bottles rearranged. My bedroom was the worst. Closet doors thrown wide, clothes pushed aside, shoeboxes emptied onto the carpet. They'd been thorough, methodical, professional. My television still hung on the wall. My laptop sat untouched on the kitchen table. They hadn't taken electronics or valuables. They'd been searching for something specific. The closet floor, the false panel, the safe. I knelt down, pushing aside scattered clothing, and felt along the baseboard until my fingers found the hidden latch. The panel swung open. The safe sat exactly where I'd left it. Combination lock untouched. Door still sealed. They hadn't found it. Relief flooded through me so intense it made me dizzy. I opened the safe with trembling hands and pulled out the hard drive. Still there, still intact. Evidence of my father's crimes, still in my possession. But for how long? They would come back. They would keep looking until they found what they wanted. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Officer Daniels arrived 27 minutes later. He was professional, sympathetic, thorough in the way police are when they know they probably won't solve a case but want to do their jobs correctly anyway. He photographed the damage, dusted for fingerprints, documented everything with careful notes. "Any idea what they were looking for?" he asked, pen poised over his notepad. I couldn't tell him the full truth. "I'm in a legal dispute with family members," I said. "Conservatorship case. It's complicated." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. He'd probably seen this before, families turning on each other over money, over control, over things that should never matter more than blood. "Looks professional," he said finally, surveying the systematic chaos. "They knew what they were doing. No forced entry on the building itself, which means they either had a key or tailgated someone through the front door." He handed me a case number and a victim services card. "The security cameras in your lobby might have caught something, but—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. These people knew how to be invisible. After he left, I sat alone in my ransacked apartment, understanding with perfect clarity that the police couldn't protect me from this. This was family business. It would be handled within the family one way or another. I called Diane immediately. "They broke in," I said when she answered. "Tore the place apart, but they didn't find it." "Bring the hard drive to my office first thing tomorrow morning," she said without hesitation. "We have a secure safe. And Emma, make copies tonight. Multiple copies, different locations. If they find one, the others survive." I spent the next 2 hours following her instructions. One copy uploaded to encrypted cloud storage, password known only to me. One copy transferred to a USB drive that I hid in a compartment under my car's spare tire. The original would go to Diane in the morning. I packed an overnight bag and booked a hotel room downtown, paying cash under a name that wasn't quite mine. Paranoid, maybe. But Marcus, or whoever had sent that encrypted email, had been right. Nothing was private anymore. Everything I said and did was being watched. I checked into the hotel, double-locked the door, and tried to convince my racing mind to let me sleep. My phone rang at 9:47. I stared at the screen, at the name that appeared there. The contact I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Sarah Harper. My sister. My stomach tightened as I answered, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. Sarah's voice poured through, sweet and concerned and perfectly calibrated. "Emma? Oh my God, I just heard what happened. Mom told me about the break-in. Are you okay?" I processed her words slowly, each one landing like a stone in still water. Patricia knew about the break-in. The police report was filed 3 hours ago. Word traveled fast in the Harper network. "I've been so worried about you," Sarah continued, filling my silence with her rehearsed concern. "We all have. I know things have been difficult between us, but family is family, right? I just wanted to make sure you're safe." Every word sounded scripted. Every pause felt calculated. I recognized the performance because I'd grown up watching our mother perfect it. Sarah had learned well. "Where are you staying tonight?" she asked, her voice dropping into something that was supposed to sound intimate and sisterly. "I could come over. We could talk, catch up. It's been so long." I kept my responses vague, my tone neutral. "I'm fine. Just shaken up, staying with a friend." But Sarah wasn't finished. She kept probing, her questions casual on the surface but pointed underneath. "Do you need anything? Money? A place to stay? I heard you've been seeing a lawyer. Is everything okay with your finances?" And then, slipped in like a knife between ribs, her real purpose revealed. "Did they take anything important? Any old files or work stuff?" There it was, the question she'd been building toward all along, the reason for this sudden concern after 4 years of silence. She was fishing for information. She wanted to know if the evidence was still in my possession, or if the break-in had succeeded. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "They took some electronics," I said carefully. "Nothing important." She made sympathetic sounds, but I could hear the frustration beneath them. She hadn't gotten what she came for. "Well, if you need anything, I'm here," she said finally. "We're all here. Maybe we could get coffee sometime? Catch up? I miss you, Emma. I really do." The line went dead. I sat in the anonymous hotel room, the phone still warm in my hand. 4 years of silence, and now this. Not because Sarah missed me, not because she cares about my well-being, because our parents had sent her to gather intelligence. The sister I'd shared a bedroom with, whispered secrets to, built blanket forts with, was now a weapon aimed at my destruction. I should have felt surprised. I should have felt betrayed. But I didn't. The Sarah I remembered from childhood was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen inheritance over sisterhood, approval over integrity. She'd made her choice 4 years ago when she watched me pack and warned me they'd never forgive me. Now she was proving exactly which side she stood on. I opened my laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Linda Peterson, Southeast Portland. Tomorrow, I would find the widow my father had silenced. I would find the mysterious person who'd sent that email. I would build my case piece by piece, witness by witness. They'd sent my sister to spy on me. So I would find the people they'd paid to forget, and I would help them remember. The neighborhood changed as Diane and I drove deeper into Southeast Portland. Trendy coffee shops gave way to auto repair shops, then to small homes with chain-link fences and yards that showed the wear of lives lived paycheck to paycheck. Diane sat in the driver's seat, quiet and focused. She'd insisted on coming with me for this first meeting. "Showing up alone with the Harper name might get the door slammed in your face," she'd said that morning. "I'm your credibility." Linda Peterson's house appeared at the end of a quiet street. A small bungalow with peeling paint and a garden that had once been loved but now struggled against neglect. An American flag hung faded on the small porch. This was where $50,000 of silence money had ended up. This was the price Harper Construction had paid to bury the truth along with the dead. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. 4 years Linda had lived here without her husband. 4 years of grief compounded by a piece of paper that told her she could never speak his name in connection with the truth of how he died. "She might not want to talk," I said quietly. The NDA scared her, threatened to take back the settlement if she violated it. Diane nodded. For someone with nothing, $50,000 is everything and nothing at the same time. But she deserves to know there might be another way. We got out of the car and walked to the gate. The drizzle had started again, that particular Portland mist that wasn't quite rain but soaked you all the same. The doorbell echoed inside the house. We waited. A curtain moved in the front window. Someone was watching, deciding whether to answer. Then the door opened slowly, just a few inches, and a woman peered out at us with eyes that held too much sorrow and not enough trust. Linda Peterson was in her mid-50s, small-framed with gray streaking through black hair that had probably once been vibrant. She wore a worn cardigan and house slippers, rosary beads wrapped around her wrist. Her face showed the particular weariness of someone who'd cried too much for too long and now held tears in permanent reserve. "Mrs. Peterson," Diane said gently. "My name is Diane Foster. I'm an attorney. This is Emma Harper. We're here about your husband, James." Linda's expression didn't change. "I signed a paper. I can't talk about it." "Harper," she said suddenly, the name registering. Her eyes moved to me, and the weariness hardened into something sharper. "You're one of them." I stepped forward before she could close the door. "Richard Harper is my father, but I'm not here for him. I'm here because of what he did to James, to you, to all of us." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for lies or hidden motives. Then she looked at Diane. "You trust her?" Linda asked. Diane nodded. "She has evidence, Mrs. Peterson. Real evidence. She's fighting them." The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of rain dripping from the porch eaves. Finally, Linda stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "But I can't promise anything." The living room was small and immaculately clean despite the age of the furniture. Plastic covers protected the couch. Religious icons hung on every wall: the Virgin Mary, crucifixes, images of saints watching over the space. But what drew my attention was the corner dedicated to James, a shrine built from love and loss. His photograph dominated the space, a large framed image of a man in work clothes, hard hat tucked under his arm, broad smile lighting up his face. He looked strong, capable, alive. Candles surrounded the photo, some burned down to stubs, others fresh. Artificial flowers added color that real ones couldn't sustain. His wedding ring sat in a small glass box, catching the dim light. A laminated newspaper clipping hung beside the frame. "Riverside Bridge collapse, 3 workers dead." The edges were worn from touching. Other photographs covered nearby shelves. Linda and James on their wedding day, 30 years younger, full of hope. 2 children, a daughter in a graduation gown, a son in military uniform. Grandchildren, 3 of them. Young faces that would never know their grandfather. A family that continued without its patriarch, shaped forever by his absence. "My children don't visit much," Linda said quietly, following my gaze. "Too painful, they say. My daughter blames me for signing the paper. My son says I should have fought." She sat down in a chair facing the shrine, gesturing for us to take the couch. "They don't understand. I had nothing to fight with." I took my seat, acutely aware that I was sitting in a space built entirely around grief. Linda began speaking without prompting, as if she'd been waiting years for someone willing to listen. "The day of the collapse, I was home making lunch for my grandson, Tyler. He lives with me now. His father, my son, is deployed overseas." Her fingers moved over the rosary beads, finding comfort in the familiar pattern. A phone call came from a number I didn't recognize. A voice telling me there'd been an accident at the bridge site. She paused, staring at James's photograph. "I drove to the hospital, but James was already gone. They wouldn't let me see him. They said it was better that way, that I should remember him as he was." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I never got to say goodbye." The funeral was paid for by Harper Construction. A generous gesture, everyone said. Then the lawyers came. 3 of them, Linda continued. Expensive suits, sitting right where you are now. They offered $50,000, immediate payment. All I had to do was sign an agreement never to discuss the accident publicly. She looked at us, and I saw the shame she still carried. I asked for time to think about it. They said it was a one-time offer. Take it or get nothing. They said, her voice cracked. They said, "Your husband is already gone, Mrs. Peterson. Do you really want to spend years in court fighting a company with unlimited resources?" I felt sick. "I had no savings," Linda whispered. "James was our only income. The mortgage was 3 months behind. His mother needed medical care. I had to bury my husband. I had to feed Tyler." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I signed on day 3. The silence that followed was heavy with all the years of guilt she'd carried. "They bought my silence for the price of a used car," she said. "James deserved better. The truth deserved better. But I was scared and alone, and they knew exactly how to use that against me. Diane leaned forward. Mrs. Peterson, you did what you had to do to survive. That's not shame, that's strength. Linda shook her head. Every day since, I wake up and hate myself a little more. She rose from her chair and disappeared into the bedroom. When she returned, she was clutching a manila folder to her chest. I signed their paper, she said. But I kept copies of everything. The NDA, the settlement agreement, the letters they sent. She handed me the folder. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped someday someone would care. I opened it carefully, scanning documents that confirmed everything she'd said. Standard tactics for silencing victims. Legal language designed to intimidate. Payment structured to look like generosity while buying permanent silence. But there was something else, something Linda hadn't mentioned. A handwritten note tucked into the back of the folder. The paper was worn, like it had been read and reread 1,000 times. I pulled it out carefully. The handwriting was masculine, hurried. Something's wrong with the steel. I reported it. They don't care. I'm going to try one more time tomorrow. If they don't listen, I'm calling OSHA. This bridge isn't safe. James, dated the night before the collapse. My hands started shaking. The night before he died, Linda said, her voice barely audible. James couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m. I asked him what was wrong. She paused, and when she spoke again, tears were streaming down her face. He said, Linda, the steel they're using, it's not right. I told them. I wrote reports. Nobody listens. They care about money, not safety. Something bad is going to happen. I can feel it. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold together something that had broken long ago. I told him to quit. Find another job. He said we needed the insurance, the pension. He said he'd try one more time to make them listen. Her voice broke completely. The next morning he kissed me goodbye and went to work. That was the last time. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. James Peterson had known. He'd reported it. He'd tried to stop it. And my father had let him walk onto that bridge anyway. Linda looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not just grief, but anger. Banked and burning after 4 years of enforced silence. Your father knew, she said. James told his supervisors, and they told Richard Harper. He knew the bridge was dangerous, and he let my husband walk onto it anyway. She took a shuddering breath. That's not an accident. That's murder with paperwork. The word hung in the air between us. Murder. She was right. There was no other word for what my father had done. I reached across and took Linda's weathered hands in mine. Mrs. Peterson, Linda, I have evidence. Financial records proving the fraud. And now I have your story. What James knew. What they paid to bury. I paused, making sure she understood. I can't bring James back. I can't undo 4 years of silence, but I can make them answer for what they did. If you're willing to testify, to break the NDA, I'll make sure you're protected. She looked at me for a long moment, tears streaming, but something else burning in her eyes now. Something that looked like fire. For 4 years I've lit candles and prayed for justice, she said. Maybe God sent you instead of an angel. She straightened in her chair, and I saw a strength I hadn't expected, the strength of a woman who'd been broken but not destroyed. Tell me what I need to do, The encrypted email address was waiting in my inbox when I checked my phone that evening. I'd been thinking about it all day. The mysterious message, the promise of more information, the warning about being buried. I typed out a response, short and direct. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Coffee on Hawthorne. I'll be wearing a gray coat. Come alone. I will too. The reply came within minutes. Just 4 words. I'll find you. Whoever this person was, they'd been waiting. Watching. Ready to meet the moment I reached out. That should have frightened me more than it did. Riverside Coffee was exactly the kind of place I needed. Busy, public, full of witnesses. Large windows let in afternoon light, and the constant hum of conversation provided cover for any discussion I might need to have. I arrived 15 minutes early, took a corner table with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the emergency exit, and ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking. The minutes crawled past. I watched every person who entered, measuring them against the faceless sender of that encrypted email. Young couples holding hands, students hunched over laptops, an elderly woman reading a paperback. None of them seemed to be looking for me. At 3 minutes past 2, the door opened and a man walked in. Late 40s, weathered face, graying stubble, a slight limp in his left leg. He scanned the room with the methodical precision of someone trained to assess threats quickly. His eyes found me. Recognition flickered in them. He walked toward my table without hesitation. He stood there for a moment, not sitting, studying my face like he was confirming something he already knew. Emma Harper. It wasn't a question. And you are? Thomas Kane. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. I used to work for your father. I was site manager on Riverside Bridge the day it collapsed. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. I noticed the scars immediately. Burn marks on his knuckles, surgical scars running up his forearms. His left leg was stiff beneath the table, a metal brace visible under his jeans. This was a man who'd paid a physical price for something. His eyes were tired but sharp, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much and learned to stop expecting anyone to believe him. You have files, he said quietly. I saw you copy them 4 years ago. I stared at him, shock freezing the questions in my throat. He continued before I could speak. I was working late that night. Security camera in the server room caught you downloading everything you could find onto an external drive. He leaned back. I erased the footage so no one else would know. The room seemed to tilt around me. He'd known. For 4 years, he'd known. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Because I hoped someday you'd use them. The weight in his voice was enormous. I've been waiting to see if you had the courage. Thomas told me his story in pieces, each fragment adding to a picture I'd only glimpsed from the outside. He'd worked at Harper Construction for 12 years, trusted employee, believed in the work. When he was assigned as site manager on Riverside Bridge renovation, he thought it was recognition of his dedication. Then, the materials started arriving. The deliveries didn't match the specifications I'd approved, he said, his voice flat with old anger. Rebar grades were wrong. Concrete mixes were substandard. I reported my concerns to the project manager, got told to stay in my lane. He escalated to the CFO, Raymond Shaw. Same dismissal, wrapped in corporate politeness. I wrote a formal memo, Thomas said. Documented every discrepancy, every risk, every potential failure point. He paused. The memo disappeared. That's when I understood this wasn't oversight or miscommunication. This was policy. Cutting corners was how Harper Construction maintained its profit margins, and anyone who objected was removed. The day of the collapse, Thomas said, and his voice changed, became quieter, harder. I was on the bridge section inspecting welds. I felt the vibration first, a deep wrongness in the steel beneath my feet. He closed his eyes for a moment, reliving it. I shouted a warning, started running. The section buckled, metal screaming. I fell 20 feet onto scaffolding below. He gestured to his leg, his arms. Broken leg, cracked ribs, second-degree burns from sparking cables. Woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The first thing he saw was the news. Riverside Bridge collapse, 3 workers dead. James Peterson, Robert Miller, Daniel Brooks. He said their names like a prayer. They were my colleagues, my friends. His jaw tightened. They were standing 15 feet farther from where I was standing. That's the only difference. 15 feet between life and death. While Thomas recovered in the hospital, Harper Construction sent visitors, HR representatives with forms and offers, full severance, complete medical coverage, pension boost, legal support. All he had to do was sign an NDA, never discuss Riverside publicly. I refused, Thomas said simply. The consequences came swiftly. 2 weeks after he returned to work, he was fired for performance issues, medical coverage terminated, pension contested, still fighting it in court 4 years later. No construction firm in the Pacific Northwest would hire me, he said. Your father doesn't just silence people, Emma. He erases them, blacklists them, makes sure they can never work in the industry again. He'd spent the last 4 years doing odd jobs, physical therapy he could barely afford, watching the men responsible walk free. I've been trying to make my survival mean something, he said. But alone, my evidence isn't enough. They've had 4 years to build walls, bury documents, intimidate witnesses. He leaned forward. But combined with what you have, the financial records, your father's signatures, the emails, together we can tear those walls down. I looked at this broken man, scarred and limping and still fighting. He'd protected me without knowing me. He'd waited years for someone with the courage to stand up. I have a lawyer, I said. We're building a case. His eyes lit with something that might have been hope. Then let me help. Let me testify. Let me say their names in a courtroom where your father can't erase them. I reached across the table and shook his scarred hand. Welcome to the war. Before we left, Thomas leaned close, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. They've been following me for 3 years. Cars, sometimes people on foot. If you saw a black sedan near your apartment, that's not coincidence. He paused. From now on, assume nothing is private. Assume everything you say and do is being watched. I thought of the sedan that morning, the shadow in the parking garage, the feeling of eyes on my skin. I nodded slowly. I understand. We exchanged contact information using the encrypted app he recommended, then left separately, 5 minutes apart. I drove home the long way, watching my mirrors, taking random turns. No sedan appeared, but that meant nothing. They didn't need to follow me every moment. They just needed me to know they could. 1 week before the hearing, Diane's conference table disappeared under stacks of documents, folders, and sticky notes in 3 different colors. The Portland skyline glowed orange through the windows as the sun set, but neither of us had noticed the passing hours. We'd been working since early morning, building our case piece by piece. A whiteboard on the wall displayed our timeline, our witness list, our evidence inventory. Boxes of documents lined the walls. 4 years of preparation compressed into 7 days. We have financial records, engineering testimony, and a victim statement, Diane said, reviewing our progress. The hard drive contents have been authenticated by a forensic computer expert. Your employment history, psychological evaluation, and credit reports all demonstrate clear competence. She looked up at me. On paper, their case is laughable. But this was never about paper, I replied. She nodded slowly. No, it wasn't. And that brings us to the decision you need to make. She stood and walked to the whiteboard, drawing 2 paths with quick, decisive strokes. Path A is defense only, she said, pointing to the first line. We prove you're competent. Dismiss the petition. Keep the criminal evidence private. You win the conservatorship case and walk away with your life intact. Your father never faces consequences, but you're free. She pointed to the second line. Path B is full exposure. We submit the evidence to the court record, trigger a criminal investigation, destroy Harper Construction. You win the conservatorship case and your father goes to prison. But everything becomes public. Your family name, your history, your role in bringing them down. There's no walking away quietly. I stared at the 2 paths, understanding the weight of the choice. Path A was safer. I could protect myself, maintain privacy, rebuild without the spotlight of a criminal investigation. But it meant letting my father walk free. It meant James, Robert, and Daniel would remain accidents in the public record. It meant Linda would keep her $50,000 and her shame. It meant Thomas would keep fighting alone. Path B was war. Total, public, irreversible war. If I chose this path, I would destroy my family completely. My father would face prison. My mother would face ruin. My name would appear in headlines, in court documents, in the historical record of corporate crime. There would be no going back to anonymity, but justice would be served. The truth would be told, and the dead would finally have their names spoken by someone other than the people who loved them. I didn't survive 4 years of silence to win quietly, I said. Linda lost her husband. Thomas lost his career and his health. 3 men lost their lives. If I choose safety now, I'm no different from everyone else who looked away. Diane nodded, something like approval flickering in her eyes. Then we build a case so airtight they can't spin their way out. She began outlining our witness strategy. Jennifer Ryan, my supervisor at Morrison & Associates, would testify first. 20 years in the field, impeccable reputation, direct knowledge of my professional competence. She would paint a picture of a capable, reliable, exceptional employee, the opposite of the unstable daughter my parents had described. Dr. Carol Martinez, a clinical psychologist from Portland State, would testify next. She'd conducted a legitimate evaluation, 8 hours of interviews and standardized testing, and her conclusions directly contradicted the fraudulent assessment my parents had submitted. No emotional instability, Diane said, reading from Dr. Martinez's report. No cognitive impairment, above-average resilience, clear judgment, appropriate emotional regulation. She looked at me. The polar opposite of everything their hired expert will claim. Thomas would testify about the material substitutions, the ignored warnings, the cover-up he'd witnessed from the inside. His testimony was emotional, and their lawyer would try to paint him as a disgruntled former employee. But his scars spoke louder than any cross-examination could dismiss. And Linda would testify about James's warning, about the pressure to sign the NDA, about 4 years of enforced silence. Let them sue a grieving widow, Diane said. See how that plays in the press. The final piece of our strategy was the asset inventory. Standard procedure in conservatorship cases required a complete list of the respondent's assets. The bailiff would read it into the record, item by item, a routine formality meant to establish what the petitioners were seeking to control. But nothing about our case was routine. When the bailiff reads external hard drive containing Harper construction documents into the record, Diane said, your father will know exactly what it means, and so will the judge once we explain. We were using their own weapon against them. The conservatorship required an asset inventory. We would give them one, and hidden in the routine list of bank accounts and property would be the bomb that would destroy them. That night, my phone rang again. Sarah. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Emma. Her voice was different this time, less scripted, more desperate. Please, can we meet? Just coffee? I need to talk to you. Why now, Sarah? 4 years of silence and suddenly you care? There was a pause. Then, because you're family, and family takes care of each other. Like how Dad took care of James Peterson? I said. Robert Miller? Daniel Brooks? Silence on the line, long enough that I thought she'd hung up. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered finally. Yes, you do. You work there. You see the reports. You know what Harper Construction has been hiding. I have to go. The line went dead. I played the recording for Diane the next morning. I'd been recording all of Sarah's calls since the first one. She knows something, Diane said. The question is whether she'll testify or stay loyal to them. She chose them 4 years ago, I said. She'll choose them again. But I was wrong. The knock came at 11:47 p.m., the night before the hearing. I was in my hotel room. I'd been staying at different hotels every few nights, never the same place twice, reviewing notes, trying to calm the anxiety thrumming through my veins. I checked the security camera on my phone. Sarah stood outside my door. Alone. No car visible in the lot. She was crying, mascara running, clutching a laptop bag to her chest. Every instinct told me not to open that door. But something was different. The performance was gone. The calculated sweetness. All of it stripped away. What remained looked like genuine collapse. I opened the door. Sarah stood there, and for the first time in 4 years, I saw my actual sister. Not the golden child. Not the perfect daughter, not the corporate puppet, just a woman who looked terrified and exhausted and done. I know I don't deserve to be here, she said, voice breaking. But I can't do it anymore, Emma. I can't keep lying for them. I stepped aside. She came in slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. We sat at the small table by the window. Sarah set down her laptop bag but didn't open it yet. Just sat there. Shaking. They sent me to spy on you, she said finally. The first call, the second call. Dad told me exactly what to ask. What information to gather? I know, I said, but you don't know everything. She opened the laptop, fingers trembling on the keys. I've worked at Harper Construction for 4 years, marketing director, but I also had access to the financial systems. She pulled up files, spreadsheets, email chains. 6 months ago, I started noticing anomalies, funds being redirected, projects canceled without explanation, insurance claims denied, lawsuits pending. Her voice was getting stronger now, steadier. I investigated quietly, and Emma, the company is dying. She showed me the evidence. Harper Construction was hemorrhaging money. Riverside Bridge wasn't the only project. There were 3 more with the same pattern: cost savings, material substitutions, structural concerns. Lawsuits were pending from clients who'd started asking uncomfortable questions. Insurance companies were refusing to cover claims. Banks wouldn't lend. Dad needs cash to survive the next quarter, Sarah said. Your apartment, your savings, it's not enough to save the company, but it buys time. She paused, meeting my eyes. And the conservatorship gives him the hard drive. If those files go public during bankruptcy proceedings, it's not just financial ruin, it's prison. I absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. My father wasn't just trying to silence me, he was trying to survive. Sarah opened another folder, email chains between Richard and their attorney, George Mitchell. The plan, she said. Phase 1, character assassination. Psychiatric evaluation based on mom's descriptions. The doctor never actually met you. They'll use your isolation as proof, your estrangement as mental instability. Phase 2, claim the hard drive as stolen company property. Demand the court seize it. She paused and her voice dropped to a whisper. Phase 3, if it looks like they're losing, George will file an emergency motion claiming you're an imminent danger to yourself. They have a witness ready to testify that you made suicidal statements. My blood ran cold. Who's the witness? She looked at me, shame washing across her face. Me. They wanted me to say it. That's why I'm here, Emma. I won't do it. The betrayal was so complete it almost circled back to absurdity. My own sister, prepared to lie under oath, to claim I was suicidal, to help them lock me away and seize everything I'd built. You were going to lie, I said slowly. Say I wanted to kill myself, to help them destroy me. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now. I was terrified. Dad said if I didn't cooperate, he'd cut me off completely. I'd lose everything, the job, the house they helped me buy, the inheritance. Welcome to my life, I said. 4 years ago. She broke then. Really broke in a way I'd never seen her break before. I know what I am. I've spent 26 years being their puppet. I don't know who I am without their approval. She looked at me with eyes that held no performance, no calculation, only raw, desperate honesty. But I know who I don't want to be anymore. Someone who destroys her own sister to keep a seat at a table that was never really mine. She reached into her pocket and placed a USB drive on the table between us. This is everything. Emails between Dad and George, the financial records showing the company collapse, the witness list, their whole strategy. I copied it last night. They don't know. I stared at the small device. This wasn't just evidence. This was Sarah burning every bridge she had, choosing exile over complicity. I took the drive and inserted it into my laptop. Files populated the screen. It was all there, exactly as she'd described. The fake psychiatric evaluation plan. The strategy to claim the hard drive was stolen property. The emergency motion draft ready to file. And one more email tucked at the bottom of a folder. From Richard to Raymond Shaw, dated 2 weeks ago. If the conservatorship fails, we move to Plan C. The girl cannot testify if she's not credible. Take care of it. Plan C, I said. What is it? Sarah shook her head. I don't know, but take care of it sounds like a threat. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I'd written off as lost. Someone who'd spent 4 years trapped in a cage and was finally finding the lock. If you're lying to me, I said slowly, I will destroy you along with them. I'm not lying. Then prove it. Testify tomorrow, against Mom and Dad. Her face went pale. They'll never forgive me. I'll lose everything. You'll lose things, I said. But you'll have something they can never give you. You'll have yourself. I reached across the table and took her hand. I left 4 years ago with a suitcase and a dream of being free. It was the hardest thing I ever did. And the best. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You just never had to find out. The silence stretched between us. Not the silence of strangers or enemies, but the silence of two people standing at a crossroads, deciding which path to take together. I can't go home tonight, Sarah said finally. They'll know something's wrong. You'll stay with Diane. She has a secure location for witnesses. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. We sat in my hotel room, the room I'd rented under a fake name, in a city that suddenly felt smaller and safer, and talked until 2 in the morning, filling in the gaps of our separate lives, untangling the web of manipulation our parents had woven around us both. At the door, Sarah turned back. I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at my sister, at the woman who'd been as much a victim of our parents as I had, just in different ways. Don't be sorry, I said. Be ready, because when that bailiff reads my asset list, Dad's going to realize he lost both his daughters, and that's when the real collapse begins. 2 hours before the hearing, I received a call from Jennifer Ryan, my boss. Emma, I need to tell you something. A man came to the office yesterday asking questions about you. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? About your work performance, your mental state, whether you seemed unstable. He said he was conducting a routine background check. She paused. Emma, he wasn't doing a background check. He was gathering ammunition. I told him to leave and called security. I thanked her and hung up, mind racing. They were still building their case, even now, still looking for weaknesses. But then Jennifer had said something else, something that was nagging at the back of my mind. I opened my laptop and pulled up my case files from the past 4 years, 8 construction fraud investigations I'd worked on for various clients. I started cross-referencing Mercer Development, West Side Properties, Thornton Infrastructure, Camden Heights, Riverside Commons, Pacific Northwest Associates, Maritime Construction, Cascade Projects, 8 different clients, 8 different fraud cases. I pulled up the contractor information for each one. My hands started shaking. Harper Construction appeared in 7 of them. 7 projects. 7 frauds. Riverside Bridge wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't even the worst. My father had been running this scheme for over a decade, cutting corners, substituting materials, pocketing the difference. And I had been investigating his crimes for 4 years without even realizing it. The pattern had been there all along. I just never saw it because I was too focused on Riverside, too convinced it was one terrible mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a business model. I called Diane immediately. We have more, I said. So much more. I explained. She was silent for a long moment. Emma, if we bring this into the hearing, we're not just exposing one crime. We're exposing a criminal enterprise. The scope changes everything. Good, I said. Let's bury him. But Diane's voice was cautious. This also makes you more dangerous. If Plan C is what I think it is... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. I understood. The more they had to lose, the farther they'd go to protect it. We arrange courthouse security, Diane said. You, Sarah, Thomas, and Linda arrive together. No one goes anywhere alone. 90 minutes to the hearing, The courthouse steps at 8:45 a.m. I stood with my team, my army of truth-tellers assembled against the machinery of my father's lies. Diane, prepared and focused. Sarah, terrified but resolved. Thomas, scarred but standing. Linda, widow, finally ready to speak. Jennifer, my boss, witness to my competence. We were about to walk into battle. I'm scared, Sarah whispered. Me too, I said. Thomas put a hand on my shoulder. Good. Fear means you're paying attention, means you understand what's at stake. Linda touched her rosary beads. James is with us. Robert, Daniel, they're all with us. We climbed the steps together. Inside, waiting in the hallway outside courtroom 317, I saw them. Richard Harper in a charcoal suit, silver tie, projecting confidence and authority. Patricia Harper in a cream dress, pearls at her throat, the picture of maternal elegance. George Mitchell, their attorney, shuffling papers with satisfaction. Richard saw me first, smiled. He thought he'd won. Then he saw Sarah, walking beside me, standing with me. The color drained from his face. His confident posture cracked. Patricia gasped. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Sarah didn't answer, just walked past them into the courtroom. Richard's mask crumbled for just a moment. One perfect, beautiful moment where I saw fear flash across his face. George was whispering urgently. Richard shook his head, trying to regain composure. But I'd seen it. The first real crack in the armor. Inside courtroom 317, I took my seat at the respondent's table. Sarah sat directly behind me in the gallery, Thomas and Linda beside her, Jennifer near the door. Richard and Patricia sat at the petitioner's table. Richard didn't look at us. Couldn't. He was too busy trying to rebuild the mask. The clock read 8:58, 2 minutes. Diane leaned close. "Whatever happens in the next hour, remember, you've already won." You refused to stay silent. I nodded, hands folded on the table. The bailiff stood. "All rise." Judge Margaret Harrison entered. 62 years old, silver hair, sharp eyes that had seen every lie the legal system could produce. She took her seat and surveyed the room. "Be seated," she said. "We will begin." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. Everything I'd fought for, every one I'd lost, every mile I'd run, and every truth I'd buried. It all came down to this. In the matter of the conservatorship petition filed by Richard and Patricia Harper, Judge Harrison said, regarding their daughter, Emma Catherine Harper. She looked directly at me, then at my father. "Mr. Mitchell, you may proceed." And the war began. George Mitchell rose with the practiced grace of a man who delivered thousands of arguments. His expensive suit and confident gestures projected success, credibility, the air of someone who expected to win. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and sympathetic, "we are here today out of deep concern for Emma Catherine Harper." He painted a picture of a troubled young woman, emotionally unstable, professionally stagnant, isolated from her loving family for reasons no one could understand. "She has made questionable financial decisions," he said, gesturing to documents on his table. "Obsessed over irrelevant materials, withdrawn from healthy relationships. Her behavior patterns suggest an individual unable to properly manage her own affairs." The exhibits came next, each one a weapon forged from half-truths and fabrications. A psychiatric evaluation written by Dr. Howard Chin, a paid consultant who'd never met me, concluding I showed signs of paranoid delusion and obsessive fixation. A financial analysis that conveniently ignored my paid-off apartment and substantial savings, suggesting poor judgment based on cherry-picked data. Witness statements from former neighbors describing me as withdrawn and strange. Observations stripped of context, weaponized. "The petitioners request full conservatorship," George said, his voice heavy with false concern. "This will allow them to protect their daughter from her own harmful decisions, to manage her finances responsibly, to ensure she receives the care and guidance she clearly needs." I sat motionless, hands folded, face neutral. Inside, fire burned behind a wall of ice. Diane's hand touched my arm briefly. "Steady. Wait." Richard took the stand next. I watched my father transform before my eyes, from boardroom predator to grieving parent. He slouched slightly, furrowed his brow, produced heavy sighs at appropriate moments. The performance was flawless. "We were close once," he said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She was a brilliant child, full of promise. Then something changed. She became secretive, distant. She rejected every opportunity we tried to give her." He described my departure as a breakdown, claimed I'd stolen company property, alleged erratic behavior and concerning statements that had never occurred. "She accused us of terrible things," he said, shaking his head sorrowfully. "Things that had no basis in reality. We tried to get her help. She refused." The emotional peak arrived precisely on cue. His voice cracked. His eyes glistened with manufactured tears. "I'm not here as a CEO or a businessman," he declared, looking directly at the judge. "I'm here as a father who's terrified for his daughter, who's watched her refuse help for 4 years, who can't stand by anymore while she destroys herself." He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. I watched the man who'd ordered materials substituted on a bridge, who'd buried the truth about 3 deaths, who'd sent people to ransack my apartment, play the victim with flawless precision. Patricia followed, her performance equally polished. "My baby girl," she whispered, tears already flowing. "I don't know where we went wrong. We gave her everything, the best schools, every opportunity." Her voice broke beautifully. "She threw it all away." She described my interest in documentation as obsessive, my independence as isolation, my competence as delusion. "I lie awake every night wondering if she's okay," she concluded, voice trembling. "Wondering if today's the day we get a terrible phone call." Even Judge Harrison's expression softened slightly. I felt a chill run down my spine. Patricia was good at this. A lifetime of practice had made her dangerous. George rested his case with visible satisfaction. He glanced at me, expecting defeat, expecting the broken woman his evidence had portrayed. Judge Harrison turned to our table. "Ms. Foster, you may present the respondent's case." Diane rose slowly, deliberately, buttoning her blazer with movements that commanded attention. She walked to the center of the room and let the silence stretch until everyone was watching her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear, "I appreciate counsel's theatrical presentation. However, I'm going to present something this courtroom hasn't seen yet." She paused. "Evidence, real evidence. Not psychiatric evaluations from doctors who've never met my client. Not financial analyses that conveniently ignore 4 years of demonstrated competence. Not tearful performances from parents whose concern emerged only when my client became inconvenient." Richard's composed mask flickered. George leaned over, whispering urgently. Something was wrong. This wasn't going according to their plan. "I'd like to call my first witness," Diane said, turning to the judge with quiet confidence. "Jennifer Ryan, Ms. Harper's supervisor and professional mentor. She'll explain exactly how incompetent my client really is." Jennifer rose from the gallery and walked toward the witness stand. I felt the tide begin to turn. Jennifer Morrison took the oath with steady confidence. 20 years in forensic accounting, senior partner at Morrison and Associates, the kind of credentials that couldn't be easily dismissed. "Ms. Ryan," Diane began, "what is your role at Morrison and Associates?" "Senior partner. I oversee our forensic accounting division." "And how long have you supervised Emma Harper?" 3.5 years. "Can you describe her work performance?" Jennifer turned slightly to look at me, and I saw warmth in her eyes despite the formal setting. "Emma Harper is one of the most capable forensic accountants I've ever mentored. She's meticulous, analytical, exceptionally reliable. In 3 years, she's never missed a deadline, never made a significant error. She's been promoted twice. I recommended her for senior associate last month. The partners approved unanimously." Diane let the words settle. "How would you characterize her judgment and decision-making abilities?" "Excellent. Emma doesn't just do her job, she excels at it. She catches fraud that other accountants miss. She's trusted with our most sensitive cases." Jennifer's voice was firm. "The idea that she cannot manage her own affairs is frankly absurd." George's confident posture began to erode. The cross-examination went nowhere. Jennifer's credibility was unshakable, her testimony devastating to their narrative. Dr. Carol Martinez took the stand next. Clinical psychologist, 15 years of experience, published researcher. She'd actually met me, spent 8 hours conducting interviews and standardized tests. "Dr. Martinez," Diane said, "you conducted a psychological evaluation of Miss Harper. What were your findings?" Dr. Martinez opened her notes, though she barely glanced at them. Her conclusions were clearly memorized. "Ms. Harper shows no signs of emotional instability, no cognitive impairment, no personality disorders. Her scores indicate above-average intelligence, strong executive function. She demonstrates healthy coping mechanisms, clear judgment, appropriate emotional regulation. She paused. In fact, her resilience scores are remarkable given her family history. You reviewed the evaluation submitted by the petitioners? I did. Dr. Martinez's tone shifted, becoming sharper. And I observed that evaluation was written without ever meeting the subject. It's based entirely on second-hand accounts from family members. She leaned forward slightly. That's not a psychological evaluation, Your Honor. That's character assassination dressed in medical terminology. Objection, George said, rising. Speculation. Judge Harrison didn't hesitate. Overruled. The witness is qualified to assess methodology. I watched George sink back into his chair, the first visible crack in the petitioner's case. Diane moved to the evidence phase, presenting exhibits 1 through 12 in rapid succession. Bank statements showing consistent savings and responsible spending. A credit report with a score of 782, 0 delinquencies. Tax returns filed on time for 4 consecutive years. Mortgage documents proving I'd purchased an apartment and paid off the loan early. Vehicle title showing I owned my car outright. Investment accounts demonstrating modest but growing retirement funds. Employment records documenting promotions, raises, glowing performance reviews. Letters of recommendation from colleagues, supervisors, clients who trusted me with their most sensitive financial matters. Your Honor, Diane said, gesturing to the stack of documents before the judge, this is what financial competence looks like. Not inherited wealth, not family connections, self-made stability built over 4 years of independent living. The petitioners claim Ms. Harper cannot manage money. She paused. The evidence proves she manages it better than most. Judge Harrison reviewed the documents carefully, her expression unreadable, but her attention absolute. The numbers didn't lie. They couldn't be spun or reinterpreted or dismissed. They were facts, cold and clear and devastating. Diane pivoted and I felt the energy in the room shift. We'd established my competence. Now it was time to establish their motive. Your Honor, we've demonstrated Ms. Harper's capability. Now I'd like to address the question this court should be asking. She paused. Why are the petitioners really here? Objection, George said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Relevance. Your Honor, motive is central to evaluating the petition's legitimacy. Judge Harrison considered for a moment. I'll allow it. Proceed. Diane turned to face the gallery, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Why would loving parents file a conservatorship against a competent adult? Why now, after 4 years of estrangement? Why hire expensive lawyers for a daughter they claim to be worried about? Why not simply reach out, attempt reconciliation, have a conversation? She let the questions hang in the air. I submit that this petition has nothing to do with Ms. Harper's well-being. It has everything to do with what Ms. Harper possesses, something the petitioners desperately want to control, something they cannot obtain any other way. Richard leaned forward, whispered urgently to George. I could see panic beginning to spread behind his controlled expression. He knew where this was going. To demonstrate, Diane continued, I'd like to request a complete reading of the respondent's asset inventory. Standard procedure in conservatorship cases, but in this case, particularly illuminating. Judge Harrison nodded. Bailiff, please read the respondent's asset inventory into the record. The bailiff stepped forward, a middle-aged man in formal uniform with a neutral expression and no stake in the outcome. He took the folder from the clerk and opened it, clearing his throat. Richard stood suddenly, his control finally cracking. Your Honor, is this necessary? The inventory is just routine documentation. Judge Harrison's voice cut through his interruption like a blade. Sit down, Mr. Harper. You are not counsel, and yes, it is necessary. Bailiff, proceed. The bailiff began reading, his voice flat and official. Asset inventory for Emma Catherine Harper. Item 1, savings account, First Portland Credit Union. Balance, $43,217. Normal. Expected. George relaxed slightly. Item 2, checking account, First Portland Credit Union. Balance, $8,412. Still routine. Richard's breathing steadied. The bailiff turned the page. I saw him frown slightly, reading ahead. His expression shifted from neutral to uncertain. He looked up at the judge, then back at the document. Item 3. His voice had changed, carrying a note of hesitation. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. External hard drive, Western Digital, 2 terabytes. Contents, financial records, internal communications, and project documentation from Harper Construction, dated 2019 through 2021. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, watching my father's face transform. The color drained from his skin. His eyes went wide with recognition and fear. His carefully maintained composure shattered like dropped glass. "That's stolen property!" Richard shouted, bolting upright from his chair. He pointed at me, his finger trembling with rage. "She stole confidential company documents. This is a setup, Your Honor. She's trying to destroy me with lies." "Richard, stop talking!" George grabbed his arm, desperate. But Richard was beyond counsel, beyond strategy, beyond the careful control that had defined his entire life. 30 years of power were crumbling around him, and he couldn't accept it. "I built that company from nothing." His voice was rising, cracking. "I won't let her destroy it with lies and stolen files. I won't." Judge Harrison's gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. "Mr. Harper, you will be silent, or you will be removed from this courtroom." Richard forced himself back into his chair, but he was trembling now, his mask completely shattered. Claudia had gone pale beside him, clutching her pearls like a lifeline. Judge Harrison removed her reading glasses and leaned forward. "Ms. Foster," she said slowly, "explain the significance of this item." Diane stepped forward, her voice measured and clear. "Your Honor, that hard drive contains evidence of financial fraud committed by Harper Construction. Evidence of material substitutions on the Riverside Bridge project. Evidence directly connected to the deaths of 3 construction workers 4 years ago." The gallery stirred with murmurs. I heard Linda's quiet sob from the back of the room. Thomas's voice murmuring comfort. The dead were finally about to have their voice. Judge Harrison's expression transformed. She was no longer hearing a conservatorship case. She was staring at something much larger, much darker, much more consequential. "Ms. Foster, are you telling me this proceeding involves potential criminal evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Diane's voice carried the weight of 4 years of silence, finally breaking. "And I believe the petitioners filed this conservatorship specifically to seize and destroy it." The judge's eyes moved slowly to my father. I watched her see him differently now. Not as a concerned parent, not as a pillar of the community, but as a man who had used the legal system to cover his crimes. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice cold and heavy with authority, "I strongly advise you to remain silent until you have criminal counsel present." "Your Honor," Diane said, "since we've established what the petitioners are really after, I'd like to present the complete picture. With your permission, I'd like to call Thomas Kane to the stand." Judge Harrison nodded slowly. "Proceed." Thomas stood from the gallery, and every eye in the courtroom tracked his movement. His limp was pronounced as he walked to the witness stand, the scars on his hands visible, the brace on his leg catching the light. He was a living testament to what Harper Construction had done. After taking the oath, Thomas identified himself. "Thomas Kane, former site manager at Harper Construction. I worked there for 12 years. "Mr. Kane," Diane said gently, "were you present at Riverside Bridge on the day of the collapse?" "Yes, ma'am. I was on the bridge section when it happened." "Can you tell us what you observed in the weeks leading up to the collapse?" Thomas's voice was steady, but I heard the old anger beneath it. "The materials being delivered didn't match the specifications I'd approved. Grade 60 rebar was ordered, high-strength steel required for bridge load bearing, but grade 40 was being delivered, cheaper, weaker, not designed for the stresses the bridge would face." "Did you report this?" "Multiple times, to the project manager, to the CFO, Raymond Shaw. I wrote a formal memo documenting every discrepancy, every risk." He paused. "The memo disappeared." "What happened on the day of the collapse?" Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I was inspecting welds on the bridge section. I felt a vibration, a wrongness in the structure. I shouted a warning and started running. He touched his leg. The section buckled. I fell 20 feet onto scaffolding below. Broken leg, cracked ribs, burns from electrical cables. And the other workers? James Peterson, Robert Miller, Daniel Brooks. He said their names clearly, deliberately. They were my colleagues, my friends. They were standing 15 feet farther from where I was. That's the only difference. 15 feet between life and death. The courtroom was silent. What happened after you recovered? Harper Construction offered me a severance package, full medical coverage, pension boost. All I had to do was sign an NDA, never discuss Riverside publicly. His jaw tightened. I refused. 2 weeks later, I was fired for performance issues. Medical coverage terminated, pension contested, blacklisted across the industry. He looked directly at Richard. Your father doesn't just silence people, Ms. Harper. He erases them. George's cross-examination was brief and went nowhere. Thomas's scars spoke louder than any accusation of bias. Dick. I call Linda Peterson, Diane said. Linda rose from the gallery, rosary beads wrapped around her wrist, and walked slowly to the stand. She was small, worn, but there was strength in her now. The strength of someone who'd been silent too long and was finally ready to speak. Mrs. Peterson, Diane began gently. Your husband was James Peterson, one of the workers who died in the Riverside Bridge collapse? Yes. Linda's voice was soft but clear. Can you tell us what happened after his death? Linda took a breath. I got a phone call. Drove to the hospital. James was already gone. They said it was an accident. Unforeseen material fatigue. Then lawyers from Harper Construction came to your home? 3 of them, a week after the funeral. They offered $50,000, said all I had to do was sign a paper saying I'd never talk about the accident publicly. Did you want to sign? No. Linda's voice broke. But they said it was a one-time offer. Take it or get nothing. They said, your husband is already gone. Do you want to spend years in court fighting a company with unlimited resources? She wiped her eyes. I had no savings. I had to bury my husband, feed my grandson. I signed. Diane handed her a document. Mrs. Peterson, is this the note your husband wrote the night before he died? Linda took it with shaking hands. Yes. Would you read it for the court? Linda's voice trembled but held. Something's wrong with the steel. I reported it. They don't care. I'm going to try one more time tomorrow. If they don't listen, I'm calling OSHA. This bridge isn't safe. She looked up, tears streaming. He knew. He tried to warn them, and they let him walk onto that bridge anyway. The silence in the courtroom was crushing. Linda looked directly at Richard, and her voice grew stronger. That's not an accident, Mr. Harper. That's murder, Your Honor, Diane said. I have one more witness, Sarah Harper. The gallery gasped. Patricia started to stand, but Richard grabbed her arm. Sarah rose from behind me and walked to the stand. She looked terrified, but resolved. After being sworn in, she identified herself. Sarah Harper, marketing director at Harper Construction, daughter of the petitioners. The judge leaned forward, clearly interested. Ms. Harper, Diane said, why are you here today? Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. Because I can't stay silent anymore. Did your parents ask you to gather information about your sister? Yes, they told me to call her after the break-in, to find out if she still had certain files. Were you asked to testify in this proceeding? Sarah nodded. They wanted me to say Emma had made suicidal statements, that she was a danger to herself. She paused. It wasn't true, but they needed a witness to make their emergency motion credible. Patricia made a strangled sound. Richard's face had gone white. Why are you testifying against them? Sarah looked at me, then back at the judge. Because Emma had the courage to leave 4 years ago when I was too scared. Because 3 men died and their families deserved better than $50,000 in silence. Because I'm choosing truth over complicity. Her voice broke. Something I should have done 4 years ago. Diane presented the USB drive Sarah had provided, authenticated by a forensic expert. The emails between Richard and George, the company's financial collapse, the planned perjury. George tried to cross-examine, to paint it as sibling rivalry. "You're betraying your own parents," he said. "Isn't this just—" "I'm choosing to be someone I can live with," Sarah interrupted. "That's not betrayal, that's survival." She looked at Patricia. "You gave me a cage and called it love. Emma gave me a way out." Judge Harrison had heard enough. "This court is not equipped to adjudicate criminal matters," she said, picking up her phone. "But I am obligated to preserve evidence and report suspected crimes." She dialed. "This is Judge Harrison, courtroom 317. I need courthouse security and a representative from the district attorney's office. Immediately. We have a potential criminal matter requiring detention and evidence preservation." Richard finally understood. This was real. This was happening. His eyes darted to the exits, both blocked by bailiffs, to Patricia, frozen, useless, to Sarah, refusing to meet his gaze, to me, standing calm, watching his empire collapse. Something broke in him then. 30 years of control, of calculated moves, of never facing consequences. All of it shattered in a single moment of animal panic. He ran, bolted from his chair, made for the side door. The bailiff intercepted him before he made it 3 steps, tackling him against the wall with practiced efficiency. "Get off me!" Richard's voice had lost all authority, all composure. "Do you know who I am?" The second bailiff assisted. Together they forced my father to the floor. I watched as handcuffs were produced and applied, silver metal clicking around wrists that had signed death warrants disguised as cost savings memos. "Richard Harper," the bailiff announced, his voice flat and procedural. "You are being detained pending investigation." The image burned itself into my memory. The CEO of Harper Construction, face pressed into courthouse carpet, designer suit wrinkled and disheveled, silver hair scattered. The man who had controlled everything, controlled by 2 bailiffs and a pair of handcuffs. I had expected to feel triumph. I felt something much more complicated. Relief and grief and emptiness all tangled together. This was my father. This was the monster who'd tried to steal my freedom. Both things were true, and neither canceled the other out. "Quand?" Judge Harrison restored order with practiced authority, directing officers to seat Richard in a corner under guard. A representative from the district attorney's office arrived within minutes. Evidence was officially logged, chain of custody established. The legal machinery that would grind my father to dust was beginning to turn. Then she turned her attention back to the original matter. "Regarding the petition for conservatorship filed by Richard and Patricia Harper," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Based on the evidence presented today, I find no basis whatsoever for this petition. The respondent, Emma Harper, has demonstrated clear financial competence, professional excellence, and psychological stability. The petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice." The words washed over me like warm water. Dismissed with prejudice. They could never file again. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "I am referring this matter for investigation of potential filing abuse. The petitioners appear to have weaponized conservatorship proceedings for personal gain. This court does not tolerate such manipulation of legal protections." She looked directly at Patricia, still sitting frozen at the petitioner's table. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper will bear all court costs and the respondent's legal fees." Patricia had sat frozen throughout Richard's arrest, her performance forgotten in the face of genuine catastrophe. Now, as reality penetrated her shock, she began to shake. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice rising toward hysteria. "This can't be happening." Her makeup smeared as tears flowed freely. She looked at Richard in handcuffs and saw her future dissolving. The house, the country club, the charity galas, the carefully constructed life built on foundations of silence and complicity. All of it crumbling. She turned to me, and her grief transformed into rage. "You did this!" she screamed. "You destroyed our family. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? You ungrateful, selfish—" Sarah stood from the gallery and positioned herself between Patricia and me, a physical barrier declaring her allegiance. "No, Mother," Sarah said quietly. "You destroyed this family. Emma just refused to help you hide it anymore." Patricia stared at both her daughters, the betrayal complete, and collapsed into her chair, sobbing. From the back of the courtroom, a quiet voice cut through the chaos. "Your Honor?" Everyone turned. Linda Peterson stood in the gallery, small and dignified in her simple dress, rosary beads wrapped around her wrist. The room fell silent. "Yes, ma'am." Judge Harrison's voice had softened. "My name is Linda Peterson. My husband James was one of the workers who died." She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I signed a paper 5 years ago saying I would never speak about it. But I'm speaking now. They told me it was an accident. They gave me money to be quiet. But my husband knew. He told me the night before the steel wasn't right. He died because someone wanted to save money." She looked directly at Richard, slumped in his corner with officers on either side. "I am not scared anymore." Judge Harrison's response was gentle but official. "Mrs. Peterson, thank you for your courage. Your statement will be included in the record, and I will personally ensure the district attorney's office hears your husband's name." Linda nodded, tears streaming but standing tall. Thomas helped her back to her seat, and I saw something I'd never expected to see. 2 people who had been erased, finally visible. 2 voices that had been silenced, finally heard. The dead were being spoken for at last. Court officers led Richard away for processing, his expensive suit wrinkled, his authority stripped, his future measured in years behind bars. Patricia was escorted out separately, no charges filed yet, but investigation pending. George packed his briefcase with the mechanical movements of a man watching his career implode. The gallery dispersed slowly, whispered conversations filling the space where testimony had echoed. Sarah found me at the respondent's table. Her hand slipped into mine. No words were necessary. Contact said everything. Our father was in custody. Our mother faced ruin. Our family name would become a headline. But we had each other, found in the wreckage of everything we'd been told family should be. Diane approached, her expression mixing satisfaction with warning. "It's over. The conservatorship at least. The criminal case is just beginning. This will take months, maybe years. Are you ready for that?" I looked at Sarah beside me, at Thomas and Linda in the gallery, at the empty petitioner's table where my parents had sat with such confidence hours ago. "I've been ready for 4 years," I said. "Now I'm not alone, eh?" 6 months later, the newspaper headline read like an epitaph for everything my father had built. Harper Construction CEO sentenced to 12 years. Fraud scheme spanned decade. I sat at my kitchen table on an October morning, coffee cooling in my hands, sunlight streaming through windows that no longer felt like walls of a fortress. The article wasn't front-page news anymore. The scandal had moved from sensation to conclusion. Another cautionary tale filed away in the public record. I folded the paper and set it aside. The trial had lasted 7 weeks. Federal prosecutors took over after my evidence went public, building a case that stretched far beyond Riverside Bridge. Fraud, conspiracy, involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice. My father's defense team tried everything. Business decisions made under pressure, industry standard practices misunderstood by outsiders, a vindictive daughter with an axe to grind. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. I attended the sentencing. Richard stood in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, listening as the judge pronounced 12 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility for 8. Additional civil liability totaled $23 million. Assets seized and liquidated for restitution to the families he'd silenced. He looked at me once as the marshals led him away. I expected rage or hatred or some final attempt at intimidation. Instead, I saw emptiness. The man who'd controlled everything was controlled now by a system he'd thought he owned. Harper Construction collapsed within weeks of the arrest. The audit revealed decades of fraud across 11 projects. 3 more bridges were flagged for emergency inspection. 2 buildings were evacuated pending review. The cost savings my father had celebrated were time bombs he'd planted throughout the region. 800 workers lost their jobs, though most found positions elsewhere quickly enough. Raymond Shaw, the CFO who'd kept the paper clean, plea bargained his way to 5 years in exchange for full cooperation. The Harper name became synonymous with corporate greed. Case studies written, documentaries planned, a legacy transformed from pillar of the community to warning for business schools. Linda Peterson received $3.1 million from the civil settlement. I visited her last month at her new house, a small place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but owned free and clear. Her garden was blooming, grandchildren playing in the yard, life continuing in a space that no longer felt defined by grief. James's shrine remained in the corner of her living room, but it was surrounded now by evidence of ongoing life rather than frozen loss. She took my hands when I arrived and held them for a long moment. "You gave us more than money," she said finally. "You gave us truth. You gave James his name back. He's not accident victim anymore. He's a man who tried to do right." She smiled through tears. "That's worth more than any settlement." Thomas Kane used his share of the compensation to fund the physical therapy he'd been denied for years. He walks without a brace now, though a slight limp remains, a badge of survival he wears without shame. He started a nonprofit focused on construction worker safety, testifying before Congress about industry oversight failures. The man they tried to erase became impossible to ignore. My own life rebuilt itself in ways I hadn't anticipated. Senior associate at Morrison & Associates, youngest in firm history, specializing in corporate fraud investigations. Portland Business Journal ran a feature calling me the whistleblower who brought down an empire. I declined most interview requests, letting the evidence speak for itself. But I accepted one podcast invitation to discuss financial abuse and family dynamics. Hundreds of messages arrived afterward, strangers sharing their own stories of manipulation and control. People who'd recognized something of their experience in mine. I read every one. Each message was proof that speaking truth created space for others to do the same. Sarah took longer to rebuild. She lost everything that had defined her identity: the job, the house our parents helped her buy, the inheritance she'd spent her life earning through compliance. The first months were brutal. Identity crisis, depression, therapy that forced her to confront who she'd been and who she wanted to become. But she survived and discovered strength she'd never been allowed to develop. She works as an independent marketing consultant now, living in a modest apartment not far from Linda's neighborhood. She's dating a carpenter with kind eyes and calloused hands and no interest in Harper family politics. We meet for coffee every other Saturday. Conversations still sometimes awkward as we navigate the unfamiliar territory of honest sisterhood. "We're not the family we were born into," she told me last week. "We're the family we're choosing to become." 3 weeks ago, on a Sunday afternoon when I was reading peacefully in my living room, the doorbell rang. The security camera showed someone I hadn't expected, Patricia Harper, aged 10 years in 6 months. Standing on my doorstep in simple clothes I'd never seen her wear. No designer labels, no pearls. Just a woman diminished by circumstances she'd spent a lifetime enabling. I let her in, not sure why. Instinct, perhaps. Or curiosity about what remained of my mother beneath the performance. She stood in my living room, the space she'd never visited during the years I built it, and looked around with eyes that seemed to be searching for something she couldn't name. "I'm not here to apologize," she said. "I don't know how. I'm here because I don't know who I am anymore." We talked for 20 minutes, or rather, she spoke in fragments, half-formed thoughts about the life she'd lived and the wreckage it had produced. There was no tearful reconciliation, no moment of breakthrough or forgiveness, just a woman facing the consequences of choices she'd spent decades refusing to examine. She left without asking to return, without requesting absolution. Just a figure walking away into an afternoon that held no place for her anymore. I watched her go and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not pity, just distance, the healthy kind. Last Saturday, I drove out of the city with the windows down and no destination in mind. The October air smelled of fallen leaves and coming rain, the particular scent of northwest autumn that always made me feel alive. I ended up at a lookout point above the Willamette Valley, a place I'd discovered during the hardest weeks of preparation. I parked and got out, leaning against the hood of my car, watching the city spread below me. 4 years ago, I left my father's house with a suitcase, a hard drive, and a desperate hope that I could build something of my own. Now I stood here with a career, a home, a sister, a future. I hadn't just survived. I'd built something they could never take away. People ask me if I feel vindicated. If watching my father go to prison brought the satisfaction I'd imagined during all those years of silence. The answer is complicated. Revenge implies I did this to hurt them. I didn't. I did this because the truth deserved to exist, because James and Robert and Daniel deserved to have their names spoken in courtrooms instead of whispered in settlements, because Linda deserved to stop hiding, because Thomas deserved to be heard, because I deserved to stop running from the family that was supposed to protect me. Victory isn't watching your enemies fall. Victory is standing in the sunlight after the storm passes. It's building a life they said you couldn't have. It's knowing your worth was never determined by people who refused to see you clearly. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Coffee tomorrow? Want to tell you about the carpenter? I think you'll like him. Love you, sis. I smiled, typed back. Absolutely. Love you too. Set the phone down. Looked at the sky, October clouds breaking, sun coming through. My life. Every inch earned. If you're reading this, maybe you know what it feels like to be dismissed, underestimated, told you can't manage your own life. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's a workplace. Maybe it's a relationship where someone decided they knew your value better than you did. Here's what I learned. Your worth isn't determined by people who underestimate you. Your strength isn't measured by the battles they force you to fight. It's measured by the peace you build when you finally win your freedom. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's a life lived well, quietly, on your own unshakable terms. The most important list isn't the one a bailiff reads in a courtroom. It's the one you write for yourself. The list of everything you are and everything you're capable of becoming. I got in my car and drove toward Portland, toward home, toward a future I'd built with my own hands, free.